On May 3rd, 1918, the Brest-Litovsk peace treaty was signed between Russia and the Central Powers, under which Russia ceded significant territories to Germany. However, very soon Germany fell, and several new independent states, including Poland, were formed on these lands. The state, revived after more than a century of neglect under the leadership of Józef Pilsudski, pursued an aggressive foreign policy. He dreamed of recreating the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth with the borders of 1772, and therefore conflicted simultaneously with Germany, Czechoslovakia, Lithuania, and, of course, Russia. And today we will talk about the curse of war with a letter. Put like, subscribe to the channel, and let's roll. After the signing of the Armistice of Compiègne, German troops began to withdraw from the former territory of Russia. They were immediately followed by units of the Red Army, which occupied the new lands almost without resistance. Thus, a long Soviet-Polish front line was formed, but initially there was almost no fighting on it. Poland was busy with the conflict with Czechoslovakia and preparations for the conflict with Germany, and Soviet Russia was losing to the White Guards and kept all combat-ready units at the front with the Whites. Nevertheless, during 1919, Poland gradually advanced its troops eastwards, capturing more and more territory. During the year, Poland occupied part of western Ukraine, part of Belarus, including the city of Minsk, and the Lithuanian city of Vilna. The USSR offered only a sluggish resistance due to heavy fighting with General Denikin near Moscow, so in early 1920, Pilsudski embarked on a truly massive project. Having concluded an alliance with the Ukrainian People's Republic under the leadership of Simeon Petlura, and concentrating 3 armies on the Soviet border, he launched a full-scale offensive to the east. The goal of the offensive was to tear Ukraine away from Russia and create the Mezhmorye, the anti-Russian side of the powers of Eastern Europe. However, the Entente intervened. France and Great Britain did not recognize the territories east of the Curzon Line as part of Poland, and were against the expansion, and therefore insisted on negotiations. But not with the Bolsheviks, with Denikin. The latter also recognized the independence of Poland no further than the Curzon Line, and therefore the negotiations did not work. So the Polish troops resumed their actions, and Great Britain stopped supplying arms to Poland. In April, the Poles took Kiev and established Petlura's government there. But it was impossible to continue the offensive. There was problems with logistics. The Poles did not have enough horses to deliver supplies in time for the nearly 100,000 strong army far away from Warsaw. So they stopped the regroup. This respite benefited the Reds. They were able to repel Denikin's offensive and drag more reinforcements to the Polish front. In Ukraine, the Red Army had only 13,000 soldiers against 30,000 Polish. In the north, in Belarus, General Tukhachevsky, nicknamed Red Napoleon, had 66,000 soldiers against 60,000 Polish. Despite logistical problems, Poland attempted another offensive near Kiev, but was met by General Yegorov's counteroffensive, which failed due to lack of horses. At the same time, Tukhachevsky launched an offensive in the north and pushed the Poles back. This counteroffensive thwarted all Polish plans, and the front stood up again. Fighting resumed in early June with the arrival of the Caucasian division of General Budionov, 16,000 men, which broke through the Polish defense near Kiev and, threatening to encircle, forced General Ryd-Smyrny to leave the city. Polish counterattack stopped Budionov near the town of Rovno. However, the main strike of the Red Army was in Belarus. In July, new forces arrived to Tukhachevsky, and he achieved a twofold advantage in numbers and went on the offensive. The Polish front collapsed. The offensive began on July 4. Minsk fell on July 10, Bobruisk on July 11, Soviet troops entered Lithuania on July 14, and crossed the official border with Poland on July 26. After such a defeat, Pilsudski requested peace. He proposed to establish the border of the very Curzon Line. However, in the past, Polish troops did not want to leave the captured territories, so the Soviets also refused to make peace. There was still some doubting. The Red Army generals realized that even despite the heavy defeat of Poland, its army is still capable of fighting. In Belarus and Ukraine, out of 400,000 soldiers, Poland used only 100,000. In addition, the civil war continued in Russia. Denikin, although defeated, managed to retreat to the Crimea, and Kolchak continued to fight in Siberia. Germany, however, played in favor of continuing the war. With just over 1 year after the end of the Great War, Germany was torn by internal problems. Spartacist uprising, the Bremen and Bavarian Socialist Republics, all of these were successfully suppressed by the troops of Weimar Republic and the Entente. But if Poland fell, the Red Army would have a bright sheet for the offensive in Germany, weakened by the Treaty of Versailles. With a limited army, it would not be able to resist and would fall. And then France, where communism is also strong. The possibility of world revolution was very attractive to Lenin, and so at his personal will the Soviet army continued the campaign. On August 12, Tukhachevsky launched an offensive on Warsaw. His plan was to force Vistula and attack Warsaw from the rear. Also in the south, Polish-Ukrainian troops were pinned down in Lvov, but Igorov and Stalin failed to take the city. While the Soviet troops were advancing on Warsaw, the Polish-French command developed a plan for a counteroffensive. They were going to concentrate large forces southeast of Warsaw and strike a sudden blow at Tukhachevsky's weak flanks, encircling him. The forces were roughly equal, 150,000 on each side. However, the USSR was facing a heavy offensive on a major city across the river, so Tukhachevsky requested reinforcements. His request was ignored by Joseph Stalin, commander of Southwestern Front, who was opposed to occupation into Poland and favored peace on the Curzon Line. Stalin sent additional forces not to storm Warsaw, but to storm Lvov. Tukhachevsky went on the offensive anyway and ran into a Polish counterattack. The Poles successfully cut into the weak links of the Red Army, broke through the flanks and surrounded Tukhachevsky troops in Poland. It was a catastrophe. 135,000 Soviet soldiers fell into the encirclement, and this is almost all forces on the Belarusian front. Tukhachevsky again requested reinforcements from Stalin and was again ignored. The front collapsed again, but already on the Russian side. Polish troops were advancing rapidly toward Minsk, but they failed to reach the city. Tukhachevsky managed to partially restore his forces to 73,000 men and stabilize the front. The Polish army, despite its numerical superiority, was greatly thinned in the course of war. The campaigns from Belorussia to Poland and from Poland to Belarus exhausted the soldiers and the army fighting ability fell. Reduction of supplies from the Entente and deterioration of relations with Germany and Czechoslovakia also played its role. New attempts to bypass the Red Army through the Baltic failed, and the Poles stopped. The Red Army began to prepare a new offensive, but Dedekin in the Crimea was replaced by Wrangel, who, having learned about the success of Poland, began a new offensive in the south of Ukraine. Also, the Mirror threats began the rebellion of the Green Movement, and all this pushed the USSR to sign a peace treaty. A peace treaty was signed in Riga, according to which Russia ceded territories of Western Belarus and Ukraine and paid reparations. Thanks for watching, leave a like, subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos. For example, how Germany took over Scandinavia in World War II or how Italy lost to Ethiopia.